Dismissed by generals, rank 97, but Predator cubs showed her the highest respect. The mockery of command, the holographic display in Conference Hall Alpha, showed 97 names in gleaming blue text, arranged in perfect military order from first to last. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's name glowed at the very bottom, a fact that Admiral Voss took particular pleasure in announcing to the assembled officers of the Galactic Alliance Station Omega. Sarah stood at attention in the back row, her human frame dwarfed by the various alien species that made up the Alliance military. The Citrani with their crystalline exoskeletons caught the light as they shifted impatiently. The Morvac delegates floated in their atmospheric suits, tentacles writhing with what she'd learned was their version of barely contained laughter, and at the front, the senior command staff regarded the human contingent with expressions that ranged from dismissive to openly contemptuous. Humanity had joined the Galactic Alliance only 18 months ago, probationary members who'd barely survived first contact with the vast civilization that spanned 12 star systems. They were the newcomers, the primitive species that had somehow managed not to destroy themselves with nuclear weapons long enough to develop faster-than-light travel. Every other species present had been spacefaring for centuries, some for millennia. Admiral Voss, a Zalathi whose scaled skin shifted from green to purple depending on his mood, currently displayed the deep violet of satisfaction as he read through the assignments. His 4 eyes focused on different data streams simultaneously, a ability that made his species natural administrators and, unfortunately for Sarah, naturally condescending toward single-focus species like humans. The pride of the Academy goes to the Expeditionary Forces, Voss announced, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced authority. Commander Krex, you'll lead the 7th Fleet into the hegemony border regions. The insectoid commander clicked his mandibles in acknowledgement, his compound eyes reflecting satisfaction. One by one, the top graduates received their assignments. Deep space exploration missions, diplomatic escorts to critical peace summits, defensive positions along contested borders. These were the postings that built careers, that turned young officers into legends. Sarah watched them all, keeping her expression neutral even as her fellow humans shifted uncomfortably beside her. Lieutenant Harrison, ranked 95th, received a supply convoy escort mission. Lieutenant Patel, 96th, would be stationed at a communications relay in the Outer Territories. Both assignments were unglamorous but respectable, the kind of positions where competent officers could prove themselves worthy of better things. And, finally, Admiral Voss said, his violet scales deepening to an almost black purple of amusement, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, ranked 97th out of 97 graduates. His 4 eyes swiveled to focus on her simultaneously, a gesture that would have been intimidating if Sarah hadn't spent the last 4 years getting used to being the subject of mockery. The Admiral made a show of consulting his datapad, though everyone knew he'd memorized every detail of this moment. The human who somehow graduated despite failing theoretical navigation, combat logistics, and advanced fleet tactics. How remarkable that Earth's military academies would send us their finest. The laughter that rippled through the assembly was polite but unmistakable. Sarah remained at attention, her dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the Admiral's head. She'd learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. The tests were designed for species with different cognitive architectures, different ways of processing information. What looked like failure to them was simply thinking differently, but try explaining that to beings who'd been doing things the same way for centuries. Your assignment, Lieutenant Chen, is particularly suited to your unique qualifications. You'll be stationed aboard the patrol vessel Whisper, monitoring Sector Delta 7. It's a remarkably peaceful region, no hostile activity in over 200 years. Perfect for someone who needs to avoid complicated decisions. More laughter, less polite this time. Sarah noticed several of the human observers in the gallery above looking away, embarrassment written across their features. Humanity's reputation in the Alliance was being built one officer at a time, and she was not helping their cause. Additionally, Voss continued, clearly savoring the moment, you'll be responsible for 4 passengers, cultural exchange program participants from Krathon Prime. The laughter stopped immediately, Several officers actually stepped back, and Sarah noticed more than a few expressions shift from amusement to something that looked suspiciously like sympathy, even pity. The Krathon were the Alliance's apex warriors, a species that had evolved on a death world where everything from the plants to the weather tried to kill you. They stood 3 meters tall on average, covered in natural armor plating that could deflect small arms fire. Their culture revolved entirely around combat, honor, and the hunt. They were valued allies precisely because everyone was terrified of them becoming enemies. 4 younglings, Voss added, his amusement fading slightly. Approximately 40 cycles old, which I believe translates to 16 of your Earth years. They require transportation to the Academy for their integration assessment. Try not to let them eat you. The joke fell flat. Everyone knew Krathon didn't eat sentient species, but they also knew that Krathon younglings were notoriously difficult to manage. They were in the process of proving themselves as warriors, establishing their place in the pack hierarchy. They respected only strength, and a human who'd graduated dead last from the academy was about as far from their definition of strength as it was possible to get. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and professionally neutral. Understood, Admiral. When do I depart? Immediately, Voss replied, his scales shifting to a more neutral green. The younglings are already aboard the Whisper. Try not to disappoint them too badly, Lieutenant. Dismissed. As the assembly broke up, Sarah made her way through, the crowd ignoring the whispers and pointed looks. She'd been the worst graduate in Academy history, the human who'd reinforced every negative stereotype about her species. Weak, slow, confused by basic Alliance technology. What they didn't know, what the tests hadn't measured, was that Sarah, Chen had graduated at all, only because she'd found ways around every single standard protocol, creating solutions so unorthodox that her instructors hadn't even thought to forbid them. The docking bay where the Whisper waited was in the station's lower levels, the area reserved for ships that weren't expected to do anything important. The vessel itself was small, designed for a crew of 2 with passenger capacity for 6. It was outdated, underpowered, and according to the maintenance logs, had a peculiar tendency to vent atmosphere from the cargo bay when the artificial gravity was set above 0.8 standard. Sarah stood at the boarding ramp checking her equipment one final time when she heard them. The sound was like thunder in a confined space, rhythmic and powerful. Footsteps. 4 sets of them moving in perfect synchronization despite the differences in their gaits. The Krathon younglings emerged from the shadows of the cargo bay like nightmares given form. Even at their young age, they towered over her. The largest, covered in deep brown armor plates with scars already decorating his chest, had to duck to clear the doorway. Behind him, 3 others followed, each unique but equally imposing. The leader studied her with eyes that glowed amber in the bay's dim lighting. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone, though his galactic standard was perfect. You are Lieutenant Chen. It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. I am. Welcome aboard the Whisper. The second Krathon, slightly smaller with reddish plates and a more lithe build, made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been disgust. We were told we would have a military escort to the Academy. They sent us the worst graduate in Alliance history. That's accurate, Sarah agreed, which seemed to surprise them. I ranked 97th out of 97, dead last. The third youngling, whose plates were such a dark blue they appeared almost black, tilted his head in what she'd learned was the Krathon expression of confusion. You admit this freely? Why wouldn't I? It's a fact. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen, dead last in my class, and for the next 72 hours I'm your commanding officer. Sarah paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. You can spend that time testing me, trying to establish dominance, or whatever your culture demands, or we can skip the posturing and have an interesting trip. Your choice. The fourth youngling, the only female of the group with plates that shifted between green and gold depending on the light, spoke for the first time. You don't fear us. Should I? Sarah asked. You're passengers on my ship. That makes you my responsibility. I've never lost a passenger, and I don't intend to start now. The leader exchanged glances with his packmates, some form of silent communication passing between them. Then he spoke again. I am Corvin. These are my packmates, Thrix, Zarek, and Vaya. We will tolerate your command for the duration of this journey. Sarah almost smiled. Tolerate was probably the best she could hope for. Welcome aboard, all of you. I'll show you to your quarters and then we can... The proximity alarm screamed to life, cutting through her words like a plasma blade through tissue paper. The calm, almost boring atmosphere of the docking bay shattered as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. Sarah's training kicked, in before conscious thought, and she was moving toward the Whisper's command console before the first alarm finished its cycle. When prey becomes hunter, Sarah's fingers flew across the Whisper's control panels, bringing systems online with practiced efficiency that would have surprised her academy instructors. The younglings crowded behind her in the cramped cockpit, their massive frames making the small space feel like a storage closet. Multiple contacts entering Sector Delta 7, Sarah read from the displays, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding. Her system. Unknown configuration, no Alliance transponder codes, count is. That can't be right. Corvin leaned over her shoulder, his breath hot against her neck. What do you see, human? 47 ships? No, 53. The numbers keep climbing. Sarah pulled up the sector map, her mind racing through possibilities. This is supposed to be dead space. There hasn't been anything here worth protecting in 2 centuries. Vaya pointed at a secondary display with one razor-sharp claw. Those energy signatures. They match Void Reaper profiles. The temperature in the cockpit seemed to drop 20 degrees. The Void Reapers were the Alliance's nightmare scenario, a coalition of outcast species who'd banded together with stolen technology and a burning hatred for the established order. They hadn't been seen in force for over a decade, not since the Battle of Proxima Gate. Thrix's plates rattled, a sound Sarah recognized as agitation. We should alert Station Omega. Request immediate military support. Sarah was already working the communications array, but static filled the channels. They're jamming everything. Wide-spectrum interference, probably using our own communication protocols against us. Someone gave them our frequencies. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Someone inside the Alliance had betrayed them, handed over classified information that would allow the Void Reapers to attack with complete surprise. Zarek moved to the weapons console, his expression darkening when he saw what they had to work with. 2 light plasma cannons, 1 proximity mine launcher with 17 mines. This ship couldn't fight off a mining drone, let alone a war fleet. We're not fighting them, Sarah said, her mind shifting into a different mode. The one that had actually gotten her through the academy despite her test scores. We're going to do something else. Run? Corvin's tone carried a note of disgust. Flee like prey? Sarah turned to face him, and something in her expression made the massive predator actually take a half step back. No. We're going to hunt them. The 4 younglings exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to curiosity. Vaya was the first to speak. Explain. They're jamming our communications using Alliance protocols. Sarah began, pulling up technical schematics. That means they have a command ship coordinating the jamming, probably with a crew that includes someone. Who knows our systems? That ship is their weakness, 1 ship against 50? Thrix clicked his claws together, a gesture of skepticism. Not against. Around. Through. Between. Sarah's fingers danced across the controls, plotting vectors and calculating angles. We're small, outdated, exactly the kind of ship they'd ignore. We get close to their command vessel, find out who the traitor is, and broadcast that information on a frequency they can't jam. And how do you propose we do that? Corvin asked, though his tone had shifted from dismissive to genuinely curious. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice expression. By thinking like humans. You see, everyone knows humans are weak, slow, and confused by basic technology. What they don't realize is that we're also sneaky, stubborn, and absolutely brilliant at improvising when everything goes wrong. She turned back to the controls, initiating a sequence that made the ship's already minimal energy signature almost disappear. We're going to play dead, drift into their formation like debris, and then cause enough chaos that they won't know what hit them. The Krathon younglings stared at her in silence for a long moment. Then Corvin did something unexpected. He laughed, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountainside. You propose to hunt Void Reapers in this tiny vessel with 4 younglings and 2 plasma cannons. Don't forget the 17 proximity mines, Sarah added, with mock seriousness. This is insane, Zarek said, but his plates were shifting to the deep red of excitement rather than anger. Completely insane, Sarah agreed, which is exactly why it might work. Are you with me? The 4 young predators looked at each other, some form of silent communication passing between them. Then Vaya spoke for all of them. We are warriors of Krathon. We do not flee from battle, no matter how impossible. Good. Sarah began transferring power from non-essential systems, making the whisper appear more dead with each passing second. Because things are about to get very interesting. For the next hour, they drifted through space like a piece of cosmic flotsam, their ship powered down to minimal life support, using only passive sensors to track the enemy fleet. The Void Reapers moved with disturbing precision, following attack patterns that suggested intimate knowledge of Alliance defensive protocols. Sarah studied their formation with the intensity of someone whose life depended on finding a weakness. The younglings watched her work, occasionally offering observations about enemy positions or vessel classifications. What had started as skepticism was slowly transforming into something else, though none of them were quite ready to name it yet. There, Sarah whispered, pointing at a ship near the center of the enemy formation. Command vessel has to be. Look at the communication array configuration. It's broadcasting on multiple encrypted channels, coordinating the entire fleet. Thrix leaned closer to the display. Heavy escort. 8 gunships in defensive formation. Sarah's smile widened. Perfect. They're protecting it, which means it's important. And if it's important... She let the sentence hang, her fingers already plotting an attack vector. We're going to attack a ship with 8 escorts? Zarek sounded more excited, then concerned. Not attack. Annoy. There's a difference. Sarah activated the mine launcher, adjusting the deployment pattern with careful precision. We're going to make them think they're under attack from multiple vectors. When they respond, we slip through their formation and get close enough to the command ship to find out who's feeding them information. And then, Corvin prompted, then we improvise. It's what humans do best. The first mine detonated exactly where Sarah had calculated, close enough to a Void Reaper patrol ship to trigger its shields but not close enough to cause real damage. The explosion lit up space like a miniature star, and immediately the enemy formation began to shift. The second mine went off 30 seconds later on the opposite side of the formation. Then the third, creating the illusion of multiple attackers striking from different angles. The Void Reaper fleet responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, with escorts peeling away from the command ship to investigate the threats. Now, Sarah breathed, and brought the Whisper's engines online. The little patrol ship surged forward, threading between enemy vessels with a grace that belied its outdated design. Sarah flew with an intuition that couldn't be taught in any academy, reading the chaos she'd created and finding the paths through it that existed for mere seconds before closing again. The younglings held on as the ship performed maneuvers that should have torn it apart, proximity alarms screaming constantly as they passed within meters of enemy hulls. Vaya worked the sensor array, feeding Sarah data about enemy positions. Thrix and Zarek manned the weapons ready to fire if needed, and Corvin stood behind Sarah's chair, watching her work with an expression of growing respect. They reached the command ship's sensor shadow, that blind spot that every vessel had where their own bulk blocked their detection arrays. Sarah matched velocity with the larger ship, hiding beneath it like a remora on a shark. Now we listen, she said, activating the Whisper's most sophisticated piece of equipment, a signals intelligence package that someone had forgotten to remove. From the ship's last refit, the enemy's encrypted communications flooded their receivers, but Sarah had been expecting that. She wasn't trying to decrypt them. She was looking for something else. There, hidden beneath the encryption, was a carrier, wave using Alliance protocols. Someone on that command ship was communicating with someone in the Alliance fleet. Can you trace it? Vaya asked, her technical skills apparently including some knowledge of communication systems. Already am. Sarah's expression darkened as the data resolved. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. On the display, a name appeared. Admiral Theron, commanding officer of the Alliance Third Fleet and one of the most decorated officers in the service. The traitor isn't just someone with access, Corvin growled. It's someone at the very top, which means the entire Alliance defense network is compromised, Sarah finished. Every ship position, every defensive plan, every contingency. Theron's been feeding them everything. The younglings absorbed this information, with the quick intelligence of natural predators. Zarek was the first to voice what they were all thinking. If we try to warn the Alliance, Theron will know. He'll either discredit us, or ensure we never make it back. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Then we don't warn them, we show them. She began working the communications array, not trying to break through the jamming but working with it, using the enemy's own interference patterns against them. It was the kind of solution that would never occur to someone who thought in straight lines, who followed protocols and procedures. Broadcasting on Emergency Channel Alpha, all Alliance vessels, Sarah announced, routing power from every system they could spare into the transmission. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen aboard the patrol vessel Whisper. Admiral Theron is compromised. Repeat, Admiral Theron is the traitor. Enemy command ship located at coordinates. The response was immediate and violent. The command ship's weapons came online, targeting arrays sweeping space for the source of the transmission. Void Reaper fighters launched from carrier bays, spreading out in search patterns that would find them in minutes. Time to go, Sarah announced, throwing the Whisper into a dive that took them away from the command ship's protective bulk and into open space. The honor of warriors. The space around them erupted into a light show of death as enemy fighters converged on their position. Sarah flew like someone possessed, using every trick she'd learned from years of being underestimated. The Whisper danced between energy beams and missiles, its outdated design actually working in their favor as newer targeting systems struggled to lock onto its obsolete signature. Returning fire, Thrix announced, the plasma cannons speaking in, sharp bursts of light. The shots were perfectly placed, not trying to destroy the fighters but forcing them to alter their attack vectors, buying Sarah precious seconds to maneuver. Behind them, the Alliance fleet was responding to their transmission, but in chaos rather than coordination. Some ships were moving to intercept the Void Reapers, others were pulling back, unsure who to trust. Admiral Theron's voice cut through the communications, denouncing Sarah's message as enemy propaganda, ordering all ships to disregard and destroy the Whisper on sight. Corvin watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Both fleets are trying to kill us now. Welcome to my life, Sarah muttered, throwing the ship into a spiral that avoided 3 missiles by margins that could be measured in centimeters. Being right doesn't always make you popular. A Void Reaper heavy fighter got too close, lining up for a kill shot. Before Sarah could react, Vaya had redirected all power from the shields to the engines for exactly 1.3 seconds, giving them just enough boost to slide under the fighter's attack vector. The enemy pilot, surprised by the sudden acceleration, overcorrected and slammed into one of his wingmen. Nice flying, Sarah complimented. I learned from watching you, Vaya replied. And there was something in her tone that hadn't been there before. Respect. They needed to find an ally. Someone in the Alliance fleet who would listen despite Theron's orders. Sarah's mind raced through the roster of commanding officers looking for someone, anyone who might Captain Reynolds. She breathed. The Benjamin Franklin. The human ship. Zarek sounded skeptical. It's outdated even by your standards. Exactly. Which means Theron won't see it as a threat worth controlling directly. Sarah adjusted course, angling toward the one ship in the Alliance fleet that might give them a chance. The Benjamin Franklin was indeed outdated, one of Earth's first contributions to the Alliance fleet. But its captain, Marcus Reynolds, was old, school military, the kind of officer who trusted his instincts over orders when things didn't add up. Captain Reynolds, this is Lieutenant Chen. Sarah broadcast on a frequency she knew the Franklin monitored. I have proof of Admiral Theron's betrayal. Hard data, communication logs, everything. Request immediate assistance. The response came after a long pause. Lieutenant Chen, this is Reynolds. You better not be wrong about this. Match my trajectory and prepare for combat dock. Combat docking was insane under the best of circumstances. Attempting it while under fire from two separate fleets was the kind of thing that got you mentioned in history books, usually in the footnotes, about spectacular failures. But Sarah had stopped caring about what was supposed to be impossible right around the time she decided to hunt Void Reapers in a patrol craft. She matched the Franklin's velocity perfectly, sliding the Whisper into its docking bay just as the larger ship's point defense systems came online, creating a protective barrier of fire around them. The docking clamps had barely engaged when the inner airlock cycled open and Captain Reynolds himself stepped through, flanked by a squad of human Marines who looked like they'd been hoping for a fight. Reynolds was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall, commanding, with the kind of presence that made people stand straighter. But his eyes held intelligence and, more importantly, skepticism about the official story. "Show me," he said simply. Sarah transferred the data she'd collected, the communication logs, the carrier wave analysis, the proof that Admiral Theron had been coordinating with the Void Reapers for months, possibly years. Reynolds studied the information in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Then he turned to his Marine squad. "Spread the word to every human ship in the A fleet. Authentication code Zulu 77. Admiral Theron is compromised. Weapons free on Void Reaper targets only. Anyone from the Alliance fleet who wants to join us is welcome, but we're not waiting for permission." The human contingent of the Alliance fleet was small, just 12 ships total, but they moved with a coordination born from years of being outsiders, of having to work together because no one else would work with them. They formed up around the Franklin, creating a fighting formation that suddenly gave the chaotic battle a focal point. And that's when something extraordinary happened. The Citrani light cruiser Shimmer broke from the Alliance formation and joined the human ships. Then the Morvac destroyer Deep Current. One by one, ships began to choose sides based on trust rather than rank, on instinct rather than orders. Theron's voice over the communications grew increasingly desperate, then angry, then silent as his own bridge crew relieved him of command when the evidence became undeniable. The battle turned quickly after that. Without Theron's intelligence feeding them Alliance positions, the Void Reapers found themselves facing a united fleet that knew their tricks. The enemy began to retreat, their perfectly coordinated attack dissolving into a desperate flight for survival. But on the Whisper, something else was happening that would be remembered far longer than the battle itself. Corvin stood before Sarah, and slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee. In Krathon culture, this was the gesture of a warrior acknowledging a superior, something their younglings were told they should never do for an outsider. "You saved the Alliance," he said, his voice carrying a formal tone Sarah had never heard from him before. "You saw what trained military minds could not see, fought when warriors would have fled and turned certain defeat into victory." One by one, the other three younglings joined him, kneeling in the cramped space of the Whisper's bridge. Thrick spoke next. "We came aboard this ship believing humans were weak. We were wrong. You are not weak. You think differently, fight differently, but that difference is strength." Zarek added his voice. "The Academy tests measure one kind of intelligence, one way of solving problems. They never measured courage, creativity, or the will to do what must be done regardless of the odds." Finally, Vaya spoke, and her words would be recorded in Krathon history. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, we offer you the bow of eternal respect. From this day forward, you are Pack. You are family. You are Krathon in all but birth." Sarah stood there surrounded by 4 young predators who could have torn her apart without effort, who had started this journey barely tolerating her presence, and who were now offering her the highest honor their culture could bestow on an outsider. "I accept," she said simply, because sometimes the most profound moments required the fewest words. Later, much later, after the battle was won and the conspirators arrested, after the debriefings and the investigations, there was a ceremony, Sarah stood in the same conference hall Alpha where she'd been humiliated just days before. But now the atmosphere was very different. Admiral Voss was gone, relieved of command pending investigation into how he'd missed such obvious signs of betrayal. In his place stood Admiral Kowalski, the first human to achieve that rank in the Alliance fleet. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Kowalski announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. For exceptional service, for tactical brilliance, and for saving the entire Alliance from catastrophic defeat, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Commander and awarded the Star of Valor. The assembled officers applauded, even those who had laughed at her before. But Sarah's attention was on the four figures standing at attention in the front row. The Krathon younglings wore their formal armor, polished to a mirror shine, and each bore a new marking on their chest plates. A small human handprint, burned into the metal with acid in the Krathon tradition of honoring pack bonds. Commander Chen, Corvin spoke, his voice carrying the formal tones of ritual. We, the younglings of Pack Shadowstrike, request permanent assignment to your command. Where you go, we follow. Where you fight, we stand beside you. This is the way, this is the way, the other three echoed in unison. Sarah looked at them. These four young warriors who had taught her as much as she'd taught them, who had shown her that strength came in many forms, and that respect was earned not through test scores, but through actions when everything was on the line. Request approved, she said, and her smile was genuine. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to keep doing things that violate every protocol in the book. We would be disappointed if you didn't, Vaya replied, and the laughter that followed wasn't mocking but warm, the sound of warriors who had found their leader and a leader who had found her pack. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Sarah stood with her new command crew, looking out at the stars through the hall's massive viewports. Somewhere out there were more threats, more challenges, more moments when conventional thinking would fail, and innovation would be the only path to survival. So, Thrix asked, "What is our first mission, Commander?" Sarah's smile was the kind that would have terrified her enemies if they'd been smart enough to recognize it. Well, I hear there's a situation in the Terminus systems. Everyone says it's impossible to resolve. Perfect, Corvin rumbled with satisfaction. We specialize in impossible, and together, the human who'd graduated last and the four predators who'd learned to see strength in unexpected places, walked toward their next adventure, ready to once again prove that sometimes the universe's greatest joke was on those who thought they understood how it worked. The Alliance would never be quite the same again. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, the word spread through military channels and backwater taverns alike: never, ever underestimate the humans. Especially the ones who graduated last, because those were the ones who had learned to win by changing the game entirely. Retry,